The number one complaint I hear from new designers that are using Squarespace and their new editor, Fluid Engine, is that it's not mobile responsive, or that they can't figure out how to make tablet-specific edits. And they're right, it's hard to do because it's not actually built into the editor, but it is responsive. So I want to start by saying that's not true. It's not that it's not responsive, it's just not intuitively responsive. There are hacks and tips and tricks that I'm going to teach you today so that you can keep these best practices in mind as you build the website to start with, so that you will have much fewer of these issues cropping up. And also when you go to do responsive edits, what you do, how you do it, all the things. Before I dive into that, if we haven't met before, my name is Caitlin. I run Launch the Damn Thing. I'm a Squarespace web designer and educator, and I like to share these kinds of tips with you because if I don't share them, who will? First and foremost, I want to give a quick disclaimer for today's video in an effort to keep things interesting on a topic that might otherwise be boring. I have asked my current client for permission to use her boudoir photography website as an example in today's video. So thank you, Sarah, for letting me use your website as an example. Let's dive in, but just note, as we are going through the video, you might see some cheeky peaches, lots of extra curves, and generally absolutely gorgeous photos. There are a couple of recurring themes here in today's episode. And I want to start off by introducing those best practices or hot tips, whatever you want to call it, because they will probably be something that I'm going to repeat ad nauseum 5,001 times. You know me by now, hopefully. I am repetitive for the sake of clarity. So let's start with the best practices, and then we will actually dive into what these things look like, how they affect your designs, and how you can use that to kind of be your guide as you create the layouts so that responsive editing later is not such a huge pain in the ass. There are three main things to keep in mind as you build Fluid Engine websites. If you are new to Squarespace and Fluid Engine, this layout engine is all you know, then it doesn't matter. Like, you don't need to have known how to use Classic Editor before this to just use these best practices. For those of you that are used to Classic Editor coming into Fluid Engine as a new thing, I'm with you. This is a totally new territory we're moving into. The three things are: keep your button containers as large as you possibly can. If the container is small, you are not giving the button text enough space inside the container. So when the screen size gets smaller, it's forced to wrap too early and create a multiple lined button. You can avoid that completely, though, by making the container longer than you would otherwise make it. There are tips and tricks to that I will go into in just a minute. The other one is to combine your paragraphs and your headings in the same container whenever possible. The more you have stacked on each other, on top of each other. So for example, if this layout was like this, it visually looks good. But what I can see here is that the heading container is overlapping the paragraph container, which is bad. Because if we resize this screen, the two start to overlap each other in a way that creates illegible text, and we do not want that. So the way around that is to put both sets of text inside the same container wherever possible, and you run into that a lot less. You can also mostly avoid this if you make sure that the two are not actually overlapping each other. If you want them to be closer to each other, just change the alignment of the text in here. That way you could, for example, move it further up to the top. It still looks like it's in the same place as it was before, but now we can get the text closer to it by aligning this paragraph copy to the top and the heading to the bottom of the container that it's in. But I highly encourage you to put them in the same container wherever possible. The third piece is that the editor uses a Flexbox grid. And while I'm not going to go into specifics on teaching you Flexbox because I'm not the best at it myself, what I understand is that literally everything inside the grid reacts to everything else inside the grid in the same space. To keep things from reacting to elements that are further up the page, put them in a different section. This is an example of a layout that I would not encourage you to do duplicated in the same section. And what I mean by that is literally copy and duplicate it and move it down here, and then just flip-flop the layout manually. So like move the image over here and then move that stuff over to the right. Don't do that, because anything that wraps and creates a longer layout starting at the top of the section is going to push everything below it further away and out of alignment. You can eliminate that completely by just creating a new section. The easiest thing for you to do is to actually copy the section itself. Now you have the same thing that you had before, but in an entirely different grid that talks to itself in a different way than this grid will. So anything that's reactive in the top half will stay reactive in the top half. Anything that's in the second section will stay reactive in that section. So they do not build off of each other in the same way. So when in doubt, anything that you can see and finish that goes across the page and you have to scroll down to see the next one, put it in a new section. That's my rule of thumb. If I can see all of the elements right here, then I don't need to keep scrolling, adding rows and more content in the same section. I'm done with that section. I don't need any more rows. I'm going to create a new section for the next visual section. I hope to God that makes some sense, because I feel like I'm not explaining that well. So when in doubt, visual elements that get separated from each other, where there's space in between, that's when you know you need a new section. So to recap, we want our text boxes to contain all of our text in one box wherever possible. And when not possible, put them next to each other. That's fine. Make them the same width if you can, but make sure they aren't actually overlapping, even if it looks like they're not. Because if the container is overlapping, you have given Squarespace space inside that container to say, it's okay for me to continue into that empty space inside this container. So when in doubt, put all the text in the same box whenever you can. Make sure that the boxes do not overlap each other, even if it looks like they wouldn't actually do that. And then make sure your buttons are as wide of a container as possible, and use the fit or fill options as your workaround. So if you have a long button and you're like, well, that's the size I need to make the container, to make sure that the text inside the box doesn't start wrapping into multiple lines, but you don't want the button to be that big, that's when you need to switch to fit instead of fill. So the fit option will make the button visually follow the styling that you have set in Site Styles. So just really quickly, let's jump into that. That is under Site Styles and under Buttons. You can decide how much spacing you want on the left or right of the button and on the top and bottom of the button here. They don't show up when you use fill buttons though. Those settings only show up when you use fit. That's not entirely true, but the spacing especially. So if you want to control the buttons on a more granular level, you're most likely going to want to use fit, but make sure you don't make the button too small. Now we have a bit of an overlap. If we do something like this, what you're actually doing, and this applies to all things in Fluid Engine, so listen closely. The grid on Fluid Engine for desktop, until it switches into mobile view, is 24 cells across. And if this button only takes up 1, 2, 3, 4 cells, That's what, 1/6 of the width of my screen. But desktop screens are wider than tablet screens. And when Fluid Engine resizes this section to fit 24 columns into a tablet-sized screen, that button will still only take up 1/6 of the space. So you have to think about the visual container you are creating that you are putting content inside, and you need to decide, how do I want this to react as the design compresses for smaller screens? If I were to start resizing this screen, notice what's happening to this button. I gave it a wide girth. The container itself is large. This one, however, is not. So you can see the difference here. If you give the button container space so that it has a lot more to work with before it has to wrap in order to fit that text inside the button itself, you run into this problem a lot less. And the reason this becomes a problem, beyond the fact that you may not want it to look that way, is that you can see the button container, because it suddenly got taller in order to make a space for 2 lines of text rather than 1 line of text. Now it's taller than it should have been, which means it's also overlapping the text on top of it. That's because it had to bump up to work in that amount of extra space, whereas this one didn't need to wrap, so it's not overlapping the text. I hope that makes sense. Think about it from the perspective of, you are creating a container for that thing to live in and resize within as the screen changes. And that goes for getting wider and getting smaller. That 24 cell grid is very important. So if you think about the size of the container as a percentage of the overall width of the screen, I think it will help you get in the habit of making your element containers larger than they might need to be, so that you have less of this issue. Because it's really hard to target these specific things in Fluid Engine and say, I only want it to do that on this size screen. You need code to do that. You need mobile queries to do that. But the thing is, you don't need any code if you just make the container the right size. So that's my hot tip. Those are my 3 best practices that I maintain as I build out new sites. And as long as I do that, responsive editing is really easy. Now let's actually jump into the website and my favorite app of choice to see how this design reacts in multiple different screen sizes. First things first, it's really hard to know what your web design is doing if you can't see it. This is the reason why us professional designers that use Squarespace as a platform have been basically busting their asses trying to get that tablet view back. Because we can't see it, we don't know what's happening. We have to use these third-party tools in order to see what potentially the issues may be and try to make some corrections. Since Fluid Engine was released, basically, I've been using Responsively app to be able to see the website interactively and scroll through it at the same rate across multiple different devices that maybe I don't even own myself, which is a fantastic way to do responsive edits. You can't actually edit the website in there. It's free, at least as of time of recording, and it is a desktop app that works kind of like a browser, so it does still give you the inspect tool, which is great if you want to investigate what the heck is going on in a particular spot. It also gives you access to full page screenshots and screenshots without the long scroll. So I definitely recommend you go download that first. The way that I do this is I have 2 screens. I have this one that I'm looking at right now, and I have an external one right next to it, and I put Responsibly on that screen so that I can see all of them all laid out, because my external screen is really wide. If you don't have 2 screens, not the end of the world. They do stack on each other depending on how many you have loading at a given time, which you can also control. You can also choose which types of devices show in the list. I tend to gravitate more towards Apple devices, but lately I've been throwing in a bunch of other devices too, like Surface Pro and Galaxy. But that said, go download Responsively. No, this is not sponsored by them, and I'm not an affiliate. I don't have an affiliate link for you or anything. It's just an awesome tool that I highly recommend. Go download it now, hit pause if you have to, and come back to the video. Okay, so I'm assuming that you have Responsively now. and you have pulled it up. Let me just go over a couple of specifics with you. First of all, you use this just like a browser. Go to the website in question. If the website itself is not launched yet, you will need to enter the password just like you do any other time when you're working with clients. If you aren't sure, you can go to settings in Squarespace and site availability to set a password for the website. If it's not on a paid plan yet, it can't be public. So if it needs a password because you need to be able to look at it outside of Squarespace, you need to assign a password, and you can choose whatever that needs to be. And that does not require someone to log into Squarespace. That's just to be able to see the password protected pages. They're not public yet. So if you haven't launched the site yet, you're working with the client, you need to be able to see it in responsively, just set a password. Once you're in, this little device toggle thing, click on that and then click Manage Suites. This is where you can check all the boxes to see all the devices you want in the same window. So these are the ones that I have selected. It also gives you the pixel device dimensions, which is nice. And then when you're done, click the little X over here to get back into the main view, and it will reload whatever you had in there. There are a couple of icons you can investigate up here, such as screenshot information and disable event mirroring, which basically means this one won't react to whatever you're doing over here in this one. And there's also the development tools, which you can open for any specific screen, or you can also do it this way if you want to pick an element and open development tools that way. You can also right click and inspect element or open console. That's all very helpful for investigating issues. Okay, so this allows me to scroll through and use the website. This is not a full page screenshot. It is interactive, so I can click and use this as if it were a normal browser, basically. And this helps me see all of the issues. Like, for example, Peep the Gallery. I don't want that button to be 2 lines on tablet size screens. So I know I need to come back over here, go to that page, and make that button container wider. So that may mean that we need to take it off of fill, make it fit, and align it to the left, and stretch that container out to the right to give it more space to breathe. If I make that change, I come back over here and I refresh so that I can see it update in real time. That should solve our problem. Just give it a minute to load. Yes, that fixed the problem. So this is exactly the same situation that I am doing throughout the entire site. I'm scrolling through using responsively, looking for all of the things that potentially could be issues, and fixing the issues over in Squarespace, but I'm using responsively to detect them. This way I can see what the website will look like on a Samsung Galaxy, on a Pixel 2, on an iPhone 14 Pro Max, on an iPad mini, on a Surface Pro 7, and of course on a MacBook, because that's the size that I designed it on. That is my secret, right? I do that for every page of the site, but I promise you, if you follow the 3 best practices I mentioned at the start of this video, with keeping containers wider than you think you need to make them, making sure there's some sort of judgment call on the percentage of the whole width of the screen that thing is taking up. If you follow all those best practices, the changes that you will need to make on the responsive side of the process will be very minimal. There are a couple of cases where things elongate and you don't really love the look of them. Then you have to decide, how am I going to adjust for this compromise, right? On the About page for this client's website, we have a section down here where the gallery block is supposed to be overlapping this background graphic. And that was the way that I had designed the section. But on smaller screens, I have to decide what I want to do with this, because it is still using the 24-column layout. This is a split layout, or a 2-column layout, meaning that half of the screen is one element, the other half of the screen is the image elements. And I can't change that. There's nothing that I can do that will make that layout work better for this size, because that is the size of that image block. So it is still overlapping. I could fix it easily if I got rid of the top half of that section. If I want that image block to take up all of the space that's highlighted in blue here when I hover over that element in the code, then I need to go into that image itself and crop it down to get rid of the solid green background that matches the background here, so it looks like it's as tall as it actually is. So basically, I just need to go in and crop the image a bit so that it will take up more visual height and actually fall underneath the image. So I've already done that over here. Now, when the image block stops, we can see that here, it's just the leaves. Whereas what I was doing before was this version where there was a colored background that matched the background of the section so that I can visually simulate overlapping in a different way, but that's not as necessary, so I can comfortably crop that out and not use it in this case. Then I can bring the gallery down so that on smaller screens it will hopefully overlap in a more visually pleasing way. So let's see what happens. What we're struggling with in this particular layout is the fact that we have a split layout with 50% of the page being text, and I want that to be the most important part. And the other 50% of the screen is imagery. And what is happening is the two are directly linked to each other's size. Because of the grid, anytime one side gets longer than the other one will adapt to fit the same height because Squarespace knows that we are trying to create a 50-50 layout here. This is the case for any column-based layout in Fluid Engine, so you have to be very careful and go into it with that in mind, because what happens as the text wraps and gets skinnier on a smaller screen, so if we're talking about 50% of the width on a smaller screen for the text and 50% for the imagery, gallery blocks don't tend to react in the same way as image blocks, which in this case I'm thankful for because I did not want the black and white images to be as tall as this leaf image is. And thankfully, because it's not resizing in the same way, it's not doing that. So it's not taking up the majority of the space here. This particular story is more about the growth and the realization and the empowerment that Sarah found. I don't want to focus that on the black and white photo. I want to focus that on the greenery because of the growth that happened from that experience. So I don't hate this layout. I don't love that it's that small and the leaves are really huge, but there's honestly nothing that I can do. So this is a great example of compromise because as it stands right now, I cannot control the height of that image block. It is going to do what it is going to do. 1 hour later. So even though the layout that I just showed you wasn't that bad, I just kept playing with it until suddenly it did this. And I can't explain it, but that's better for me. Visually, that's a lot closer to what I had intended on desktop. It's just a little bit lower, but I'm not going to touch it because now it's not stretched out. It's still overlapping, and I'm going to leave it alone. So it's maybe not in the exact right place that I want it to be in tablet, but at least the shape and the layout is really close to the way that it is on desktop view, and I am not going to complain about that. So this is a perfect example of compromise. All website platforms have their own version of this hellhole that we fall into when we talk about responsive design. I don't care if you're on Shopify, WordPress, Showit, Squarespace, Wix, they all have their own version of this hellhole. Squarespace's is related to Fluid Engine and how the elements on the page react to the screen size. With something like Showit, The elements themselves are not responsive. You have to set one way that it looks on mobile and one way that it looks on everything else. And for Webflow, you have to build in the responsiveness by setting your own container sizes so that things do this, but like from scratch. In various options for WordPress, depending on the builder that you're using, I'm sure it's similar. In Wix, you also have a mobile builder and a desktop builder. They all do it differently. This is just how Squarespace manages it. You're not going to find a platform that does not have a similar issue, because it's just really hard to design something that's attractive on all screen sizes, unfortunately. So go into it with that mindset, because there are 1001 screen sizes out there. Everything from my Apple Watch to a 70 some odd inch TV on the screen. And you need to make sure that, to the best of your knowledge, that design will look legible and readable on most of those sizes. For most people, that will mean computer-based devices or phones. So the vast majority of all website traffic will be on those two sizes, and that makes things slightly easier. Most people are not going to be browsing websites like this on their TV. It's not possible to do on your Apple Watch, so like we got something going for us there. For everything in between, though, it really is difficult. But if you keep my best practices in mind and you use something like responsively so that you can see what's happening in the in-between sizes, then you know what you need to go adjust in Squarespace land. That does genuinely help. The other thing that you can try that doesn't always work is to go to the page in question when you are in edit mode specifically, resize your window to fit approximately the same screen size that you see in responsively. At least resize it until you start to see the issue crop up. For example, this image is not set to fill, it's set to fit. And I would not want that image to be that small in that particular layout. So that's a good, like, I maybe would not have noticed that had I not checked on a smaller screen size. Sometimes if you resize your edit screen and you make changes to remove like extra space, for example, as we pull the website in and things get longer, then you save that change and then you drag it back out, often you get weird spacing issues. For example, this card was not that big when I started, and that text block did not have so much space underneath it. So when you are going back and forth, make sure you double check the sizes of things, because the back and forth movement in Fluid Engine often creates strange spacing issues. We are hopeful that Squarespace will take that into account and build in some sort of solution that will take some of that burden off of us. But in the interim, all we can really do is make sure that we're looking for those kinds of issues ourselves. Sometimes if you resize your editor down to the part where you can see extra space that on a smaller screen that you can't see in a desktop, you can remove it, save the change, exit, and then come back into it to see if that fixed the spacing issue. So just try that going forward. Keep those best practices in mind, and I think you will have a much easier time getting your website to be more mobile responsive. I hope today's video helped, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.